It is only when we truly know and understand we have limited time on earth, and we have no way of knowing when our time is up, that we will begin to live each day to the fullest, as if it were the only one we have. "20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. The purpose of life, after all, is to live it, to taste experience to the utmost, to reach out eagerly and without fear for a newer and richer experience. To those who stay put, the world is but an imaginary place. But to the movers, the makers, and the shakers, the world is all around, an endless invitation. So the only question left to ask yourself is, where should you go now?"
Wow, that was a powerful video. I hope that you've enjoyed that. And every time you come on to this channel, I hope that you feel the passion we have for helping a lot of people. My name is Casey James. I'm the Vice President of Sales for YEP and the Young Entrepreneurs Project, and so excited to be here. I have been involved in the direct selling industry for over 30 years. I've been in personal and professional development, teaching, training, coaching, mentoring now for over 18 years. And I'm just excited to be able to share a few things with you. I actually, in connecting with the Young Entrepreneurs Project and really saying, well, what can we talk about to get, kind of my debut here onto the platform? And I wanted to talk specifically about the fact that we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We actually fall to the level of our training. I want to take you back, goodness gracious, 33 plus years ago, when I first got involved in the networking industry. I was a DJ in a nightclub, east side of Toronto, Canada. Was doing okay, making 50 a year, making $40,000 a year, spending 45, always but kind of behind, didn't have the upbringing or the history, the background to kind of give me the insight I needed to achieve a better result in my life. I ended up getting called to go to a meeting and learn a little bit about the networking industry. I eventually got contacted and connected to my mentor, my very first mentor, and his name was Dr. George. And he said, Casey, he says, most people never really become their true greatest self because they don't really have the right training. They don't have the right information and the tactics to do the right things. And I remember just being hungry. I remember he said that, he asked me how much money I made. I said, I make, $40,000 a year, which, 30 years ago was a big deal. But he said, well, he says, what's your dream? I said, well, my dream is to make like $100,000. I thought if I ever make $100,000 a year, I would just feel so successful. He says, okay. He says, I'll tell you what, give me 5 years and I'll show you how to be $100,000 a year earner and make $100,000 a year. And I remember thinking to myself, it's like, oh my God, the windows, the doors have opened up. I'm going to make it, and having all this hope and excitement and wishing that, things could really turn out for me. Well, one of the things that was interesting was I got started in the first 90 days. You have to understand I had long hair, mustache every 4 days. I was very good looking, opinion a long time ago. But I was in this space of kind of I got this. I was running a DJ company, had 40 DJs, one of the top DJs in Toronto. And I was getting praise every night, running the biggest nightclubs. And I was all that and sexy, making no money, burning out. But I was looking the part. And I remember my mentor kept saying to me, he says, Casey, he says, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. He says, you need to use them in promotion. I remember I was talking twice as much as I was listening. And he says, you are not going to rise to the level of your expectations. He says, because you're not willing to train. You're going to fall to the level of your current competence. You're going to fall to what you already know. He says, the problem with you, Casey, is you have a cup that's filled with water that's not capable of receiving any more water. He says, you need to turn your cup over, be a student, show up with an open glass And he says, and allow other people to flow into it. And I remember that moment, like, wow, like I'd never heard that before. He says, Casey, the only limitation of what you're able to achieve is based on the bias that you actually already know how to be successful. He says, it's just a reflection. He says, you actually don't know squat about success. He says, you know how we know that? I go, no. He says, look at your world. He says, the physical universe doesn't lie. Everything you have is a result of everything that you've created, which is usually a result of all the thoughts that you've thought. He says, your thoughts make your world. And he says, if you don't change that thought into some form of skill that can be measured, he says, you're just going to be a guy hoping to be successful, hoping it's going to go well, being a positive thinker and optimism and all that nonsense. He says, and at the end of it, you'll still be in the same spot. I don't know if you're the kind of person that has been on trainings and seminars and webinars where you've been listening to them and saying, it's be positive and optimistic and build affirmations. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that they're telling you to be positive without backing it up with the mechanics, the do on the positive. So when I tell people, there's a difference between the abstract and the concrete. No question. Positive, optimism, mantras, affirmation, chant, like do the things that put you into that format of really being a success, but then be deeply honest with yourself. I tend to consider myself an optimist realist. I tend to be very optimistic that everything's going to go in the right direction. We're going to achieve the right results. We're going to produce amazing outcomes. I'm always optimistic. However, the difference is that I'm actually very realistic. I'm like, yeah, and this is going to take grind. This is going to take work. I'm going to have to listen, re-listen. I have to clear my schedule, take all this stuff off the plate. I'm going to have to do this to get a result. I'm going to have to change the way that I'm approaching the way I do what I do. Because if I don't change the way that I approach this, I think that the problem's going to be me. I'm going to be so optimistic about my expectations, but I'll have no physical results because I didn't really have an implementation system to actually make the expectations come true, move them from the abstract to the concrete. I needed to test and measure. So someone asked me the other day, said, Casey, so what do I do to move my expectations to results? I said, okay, great question. So here's what it is. The key is to take the skill that you're learning right now. Of course, we're in the Young Entrepreneurs Project, and we have an amazing, life-changing skill. We believe that learning how to trade the market with the amazing skills that Corey, come right through, of course, our Young Entrepreneurs Project and Driven and some of the amazing people we're part of, we believe that you can learn one skill one time and literally for the rest of your life, take care of your family. And that's our message to people. We've got a message that we think is going to change the world, because there's lots of skills and lots of things you can learn out there. But imagine one skill that'll protect you for the next 50 years. And that's trading the market. It's not like the stock market's going away, right? So we know that. So one of the things that we started realizing is we need to measure where you are. So people are coming into our platform are starting to realize it's we need to kind of figure out where you're at. And our system isn't totally finished yet, but we're building a system to measure, okay, how much do you know about this topic? What do you know about this subject? So that's the first step. You measure it. And then what you do is you test it to see how much of what you know is true. And then you measure it again and test it, measure it again and test it, and then measure it. And you go back and forth, trying to build a trajectory of awareness so that you know that you've changed from what you knew to what you now understand and know how to implement and do. I listen to lots of seminar speakers. I've been in the personal professional development space now for 30 plus years. I was 25. I'm now 57. So that's 32 and a half years I've been involved in this space. And what's interesting is that I've watched a lot of people come up on stage and say a lot of things, but I find that there's very few things that actually get implemented. And in my case, I stood back and I said, I want to listen to speakers to only find the things that I'm going to take action on. What am I going to take action on? Because I realized really quickly that the more that I'm focused on all of this content and the less I'm focused on all the transaction, the more I stay in expectation than I do in outcome. And if you want to change your life, you're going to have to change your life by implementing and actually doing the practice, actually doing the training, testing and measuring, testing and measuring, testing and measuring and measuring and testing, and making sure that you're moving through. Someone asked me the other day, they said, well, Casey, how do you test and measure yourself? I said, well, you take the training. If the training you're doing, you don't know what it is, take it and grab the nuggets of information and then ask yourself a day later, do I remember all the points? So a lot of things I love to do is I love to grab, like if I've got an audio from a favorite speaker, I will grab that audio and I use a transcription service. I have the benefit of doing that. And I use a transcription service. I go through it and I just carve out the nuggets I want, because I want those nuggets to be available to me. And then what I do is I just kind of pull them out. And then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, there's the top 5 things I want to remember from this talk or from this training, whatever it happens to be. And then what I do is I put them on a piece of paper, and I used to post them on my walls. Of course, today I do it on a digital format, but I used to post them on the walls behind my whole thing. And one of the things that was really powerful for me was I realized is that I could remember by looking at the items on the wall. And so as I got older and I obviously grew into my own level of success and training, it was because I was constantly remembering to remember the key things I wanted to implement. Then I could test and measure myself to make sure that I wasn't just rising to my expectations. I was tracking my rise to the expectation that I would know that I knew all the information I could actually implement it. So there's a book out there from Malcolm Gladwell called The 10,000 Hour Rule. And when that first came out, like 10, 15 years ago, they said that the secret to true success in any profession was actually getting to like 10,000 hours of expertise in something. And in my first 10 years in the networking industry, by the way, I was a $30 million earner in MA. So I'm not average. I'm not even above average. I'm not even extraordinary. I'm in a 0.0001% income earners in the network marketing profession. I'm in the top 1,000 of all time. So I'm not just the average guy that got in that thing and made a few bucks. I led 250,000 people in 22 countries around the world. I've authored 5 books. I've stood at the pinnacle of the pinnacle and watched the best of the best take notes from me. That's the level that I played at. I know what this is like. I understand this space. And so one of the things that was interesting was that when the book came out and I was reflecting on the book, because at that point, I think the book was about 10 or 15 years ago. I was about 15 years into my journey. I was making $500,000 a month, and people are like, what's the secret? And I kept thinking to myself, what is the secret? And the answer was, it was time and mastery. I poured my guts into listening, learning, reading. I went anywhere, did anything to get the knowledge I needed to. And then I transcribed it, as you've heard me say, and I put it up on the walls and remember, and then test myself to make sure, do you remember this? Do you remember that? I constantly get myself into positions where I'd have to remember. I remember the greatest thing that I ever did was I started mentoring and coaching other people, because there's a trifecta of success that drives true excellence. And the trifecta of success is that you must have a mentor, someone that you're tracing and tracking and following, that's where you want to be. Then you need to have a peer partner, someone that's a running mate. You're not necessarily a competitor, although you may compete in the industry, but you don't see each other as competitors. You see each other as buddies running, knowing that the market and the world is big enough for everybody. And you have that peership with them. You love sharing with them. You don't feel competition, but it's a positive competition, And then the magic, the trifecta, the third piece is the student. That student was the breakthrough for me. When I actually realized that I was not only listening with one ear for myself, but listening for the second ear for others, that shifted everything for me. So for me, when I talk to people about business, life, success, training, studying a skill, whatever it happens to be, I'm always looking for my mentor, I'm looking for a peer partner, and I'm looking for that student. If I can find someone to actually teach this to, my retention went vertical. So I started doubling down on the number of people I was mentoring, coaching, and training. And actually, at the peak of my career, I was actually mentoring 65 people a month. Just think about that for a second. I was hours, just hours and hours and hours and hours on phone, live, meeting people at conferences, events, just constantly connecting and teaching and sharing. And as soon as I learned a new concept, as soon as I learned a new idea, I taught it, because the teaching caused the retention, which increased my measurable results, because I knew because I was already teaching it. And that was the magic piece. So for me, when people talk to me about what's the key, I said, well, 10,000 hours is what they found out. The interesting thing, though, was that there's a lot of social psychologists who came back and said, I'm not really sure that that's true, that it's 10,000 hours. And in ripping down and pulling apart the research and the science of that, They said, well, it's true because anybody could technically sit in a space, start to study that space. Let's say, for example, learning a language. A language can be very difficult. One of the toughest languages in the world, Russian and Chinese. These are the two toughest languages to learn because they don't tend to have any other similar languages like them, but they're like kind of primary languages, certainly in our world. And one of the things that's interesting is it's like if you speak English and you're trying to learn Chinese or Russian, it's 300 hours of just sitting in the language before you even feel a little bit of a shift. You're like, I think I know what that means. Like, it's like you've got to actually sit in it for you to start even recognizing it. Whereas other languages, you can sit in Spanish for 50 to 100 hours and kind of get a good roll on it. So it's especially if you're coming from English to Spanish. Why do I tell that story? Well, the thing that they did in the research was they figured out that 10,000 hours was true when people were in a particular skill and practicing that skill and practicing it over and over again, trying to move from where their training was, move that up to the expectations that they would be competent in something. Well, here's what's really interesting. They actually then broke the study down and they said, well, what happens if we don't get them to just practice or train or develop that skill? What if we actually went the other way? What if we put them in the presence of an expert's expert, like somebody who was considered the best or some of the best in the world, and a virtuoso? So, for example, one of the tests they did was with people playing the guitar. They took people and said, how many hours does it take to become competent playing guitar? Well, you're functional at 100,000, you start to be pretty good. At 10,000, you're a virtuoso, right? You're an amazing guitar player. They said, well, what would happen if we took somebody who was zero skill in guitar, but we put them in with a virtuoso? What if we put them in with somebody who's just one of the finest in the world? What was interesting is that they found out that it wasn't practice that made perfect. It was perfect practice that made perfect. And they cut the 10,000 hours into a quarter so that you could arrive at almost world-class levels in less than 2,500 hours. And of course, when people ask me today and say, Casey, like, I don't have 10 years to get good at my career, my profession, my industry, I said, that's probably true. But in order for you to accelerate your training to a new level, you're going to have to find somebody who's a world expert, or some sort of mentorship that's sitting above the average, the normal. Because if you can pick up not only their skill set or the transfer of the talent, but the consciousness that goes behind it, then you've got the multiple layers of the training and the aspects of whatever it is that you're studying and learning. So today's talk was actually designed to be kind of like a teaser on, like, most people have a positive expectation about their success. And I think that there's a wonderful bias about that. But without testing and measuring it, you're going to always lean to a positive bias because you're going to say, oh, I'm doing good. But it's like you have no reference to good. You have no reference to great. You have no reference to perfection. Because if you were actually measure yourself against another measure that was so extraordinarily exceptional, you'd realize it's like, oh, I kind of need to up my game. And I always tell people, I said, if you want to know how you're doing, just measure yourself in the real world. Like, put yourself up against what's really going on. Again, I want to repeat, I'm an optimist, realist. I optimistically believe anything is possible. I believe anybody can do it and or achieve pretty much whatever they want to within the the limitations of our Newtonian physics world. Or if you're 70 years old, being in American football is probably not going to be your thing. You know what I mean? But it's like it's not that you can't. It's just like, well, maybe you shouldn't. I always tell people, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So finding what I'll refer to as your unique ability, that thing that God made you to come here and share with the world. That's the secret. Now take that, amplify the heck out of that, and see where that goes. When I was younger, I didn't grow up in a lower middle class income. My father was a garage mechanic. My mom was a homemaker. I mean, we didn't have a lot of money. We just did the best we could. I didn't grow up with being motivated every day by my parents or telling me I was great or whatever. I just one day was sitting at school and the teacher said, "Okay, class, it's time for all of you to give a speech." And I remember going, speech? Like, what am I going to talk about? And I remember I grew up in Toronto, and in 1976, I know, which is 100 years ago, but 1976, I was a young, excited, 12-year-old little boy. I was born in 1964, right? So I was all excited because they were just building the CN Tower, which was the tallest freestanding structure in the world. And they said, we're going to give a speech. And every kid in the class panicked. They're like, oh my God, this is terrible. A couple of high confidence kids, they were like, hey, I got this. And me, I was neutral. I was like, I don't have a clue if I can talk. I never thought about it and never cared about it. I didn't even know what I needed to do to prepare. So they said, just give some of the things that you're most excited about and make sure you're finished in 2.5 minutes. So I was like, okay. And I remember jotting a few things down, not thinking much about it. And then it came my time to talk, and the teacher says, okay, go up to the front of the class. And Casey, what is your topic going to be today? I said, I'm going to talk about the CN Tower. The CN Tower is going to be the tallest freestanding structure in the world. And it's got this and this and that. And then went on and like this. And then I could see the clock climb down. I said, and that's why everybody needs to go to the CN Tower and see the biggest tower in the world. And the teacher was like, holy crap. Well, I won. Like they said, okay, well, like Casey's a 10. And they said, we want to volunteer you to go into the school competition to represent our school in the speaking contest. I'm like, you do? He says, can you do that again? I'm like, I guess so. So this time I wrote it down more formally, and they said, well, you have to have beginning and ending. You have to have a conclusion statement, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know any of that. I didn't care. I just used my excitement. Then I get up there. I got a gold medal. I literally got a gold medal for speaking. And I'm like, is that good? I'm 12. Woo! And I was just so excited. Well, then here's what's interesting. I had a natural talent, what we call a unique talent, but it would take 10,000 hours of teaching, speaking, studying, memorizing, personal professional development, learning content to share that was relevant and valuable to other people for me to accelerate this from a talent, something that I could do, to something that made me unique, something that people paid me millions to do. And there's a reason why, is because I not only put the time in, I mean, now I've got to be clear, 25,000 plus hours, the amount of time I've poured into learning how to speak and teach and share and express information to people in a passionate way that causes them to take action because they feel the synergy and the power behind taking action in certain ways. And so for me personally, I just get really, really jacked that sometimes people don't realize that, yeah, there is a part of your expectation that needs to be positive, and that's true. But you don't rise to the level of your expectations. You do rise to the level of your training, which when measured and tested and tracked for, moving the positive bias off to what are the actual facts, and then actually pouring in expertise, going and getting the finest teachings and speakings in the world, and whatever it is that you're studying. We have the amazing Corey Comrade who's teaching people how to trade the market. And it's like, oh my God, whatever you do, just hang on to him with every breath. Don't just study what he's saying on the training. Study who he's being while he's teaching you how to trade. That, my friend, will move you from 10,000 hours to 2,500 hours of literally getting perfect practice. Perfect practice makes perfect. Practice doesn't make perfect. When people hear practice makes perfect, no, it doesn't. Perfect practice makes perfect. Focus on finding mentorship, a peer partner, and a student so that you can teach what you're learning in real time and prosper from these trainings that can totally and completely change your life. So thank you so much. This is my debut here at the Young Entrepreneurs Project. And I hope today you were able to take away a few pieces that can really, truly make a difference in your life. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.